Sometimes we need to be quiet for a moment and just listen. Just listen. When we run off with the mouth without listening, we miss a lot of things, important things. Before I started Hobby Money, I've been watching and listening for years. I've noticed how people continuously talk about our plights, but offer no solutions. I've also noticed that the people who do offer solutions are pushed aside or demonized for whatever reason. When you come to me with a problem, I expect you to have at least one solution in your back pocket. It may not be the right solution, but it's a start. This is what counts. Some people judge me because of my accent. They judge me because of the way I sound and don't want to hear my view on American reparation, Black American repairs for chattel slavery, because they don't see the connection and they don't feel that I should have to say anything. They don't want me to have a say because they assume that I want some of what they know is rightfully theirs. This is the problem, people. This is a problem because no one stops to listen. So no one will ever get to hear the full story and understand why I play a vital part in Black America's story, just as Black America plays a vital part in my story. I heard a few people running off at the lips about reparation. And once again, they speak about people wanting to filter into their spoils. And what they were describing sound as though they were describing me. So I would assume that they saw my 6-part chattel slavery project, okay? These people have not a clue of what they're speaking about. They don't understand the mechanics. They don't understand all the parts that America, the United States of America, has its hands in. I am not telling you how to feel because I have seen firsthand since I've been here the atrocities. Hell, I have had stuff happen to me and I was shocked like hell. Okay? So I can't tell you how to feel. All I am asking you to do is stop and listen just a little bit. Just stop and listen. You may just learn something. This video is intended to demonstrate the importance of Black American fight for chattel slavery repair to me as a Crucian Caribbeaner. It also sheds light on the reason I chose to position monetary compensation as the last stipulation of chattel slavery repair. The arrangement of this project. I find that micro-learning is an easy way for you to comprehend and retain the information that you take in. This is why I broke the project into 6 parts. This way you are not overwhelmed. It also helps you to not mix apples with oranges. Every part has its own story. For this reason, I listed each component from the most to the least importance. The importance of this project. Coming from St. Croix, the United States Virgin Islands, it is important that people understand that all so-called Blacks are in this together. Remember, Haiti stood alone And up to this day, we can see the punishment that they have inflicted and are continuing to inflict on Haiti for taking a stand. It doesn't matter who held your suffrage papers. I say this because Denmark sold the islands in the Caribbean, aka West Indies, to America in 1917. St. Croix was one of those islands. Denmark was the seventh largest slave trade nation during the transatlantic slave trade. If Denmark was the seventh largest slave trade nation, who was the sixth, the fifth, the fourth, the third, the second, or the first? The transatlantic slave trade took place from the 16th to the 19th century. The slaves were caught or bought by the Europeans, were transported to the colonies in North and South America. Let's not forget that Black nations existed in all areas of the United States of America before Columbus arrived. He found 5 million indigenous Black people in America. In fact, DNA verifies that some Black people are indigenous to America. Records show that in 1492, hundreds of thousands of Black indigenous people were relocated from America to Europe and Africa as chattel slaves. The American Holocaust did not claim the lives of all the Black indigenous people of America. So some Blacks may be in Africa not knowing that they are indigenous to America, just like some indigenous Africans may be in America not knowing that they are descendants of African chattel slaves. This is what they did to create confusion as to who you are. In 1816, the American Colonization Society was founded to transport the free indigenous Black people from America to the west coast of Africa as chattel slaves. More than 12,000 were transported. And then in 1866, the United States government had the Cherokee Nation sign a treaty to recognize the Black indigenous people of African descent as full citizens of America. So what they did was they transported some indigenous American people to different areas and brought some African descents and mixed them in with the indigenous people here. So you don't even know who the hell you are. So how you gonna stand up and talk about not mixing this and not doing that? You don't know. They know something that you don't know. So they have an upper hand in why they're doing what they're doing. But I digress. So let's get on so you can see why I am letting you know. My story is your story, just like your story is my story. The U.S. Virgin Islands are part of the United States of America, and all diplomatic connections between Denmark and the Virgin Islands must be granted prior permission from Washington, D.C. Let me repeat this so you can get an understanding, because I don't think you're listening. The U.S. Virgin Islands are part of the United States of America, and all diplomatic connections between Denmark and the Virgin Islands, Denmark, the people who sold the U.S. Virgin Islands to America, the United States of America, must be granted prior permission from Washington, D.C. The United States only apologized for slave trade in 2009. They only apologized in 2009 to the United States Virgin Islands, okay? And has not since paid any compensation. It would have been and will therefore still be considered undue interference with American domestic politics if Denmark apologizes and subsequently pays compensation for the slavery. the chattel slavery, that is. For the slaves and their descendants on the Virgin Islands, slavery didn't end in 1848 or in 1917 as reported. Some claim that the effects are still felt today. During the transatlantic slave trade, Denmark was involved in the transportation of around 100,000 slaves from Africa to the former West Indies, aka the Caribbean. There, the slaves were forced to work in the sugar plantations under inhumane conditions. The black enslaved people made up the majority of the population, while only a few white European elite controlled the land. And that's the way I grew up knowing it to be. There were 98, 97 or 98% blacks. You have a few white people that they live on the end of each part of the island, up in the hills and what have not. And the stores they had, the prices were sky high, where the local people like us couldn't afford. So we weren't going there to shop. Okay? So nothing changed. Things started changing when we started fighting for reparation in 2003 or 2004. When people start fighting for reparation, then what they did is they start flooding in, they open up the gate and they start flooding in the Danish people, okay? In the ghettos where I grew up in, okay? We were afraid to go in other ghettos that were really horrible. They now have white people living there, okay? Ghettos that I was raising all of that. Why would I be afraid to go in a ghetto? It tells you the kind of dangerousness that was going on in that ghetto. But now they have Danish people living there. Okay? So that tells you the intent. Okay? The intent is to white out the island. I digress. In 1792, there were 231 estates, 162 sugar plantations, 33 cotton plantations, 27 livestock plantations, and 9 plantations growing a variety of crops. St. Croix became the 4th largest sugar producing colony in the Caribbean, aka West Indies, despite it being one of the smaller colonies, only 83 square miles. Okay? While Christiansted and Frederiksted were the centers for exporting and importing goods, in 1815, 90% of St. Croix's land was used for cultivating sugar, and 97% of the rural population were forced to work as enslaved laborers on the sugar plantation. That was black people. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Become a frequent visitor of Hobby Money. Enslaved people had secretly and deliberately planned to revolt for a year prior to July 3rd, 1848, the day of the revolt and subsequent emancipation. The enslaved people demanded that they be freed by 4 p.m. that day. Otherwise, they threatened to burn the fort and the city down. Now, all these slides, the backgrounds I'm showing you, those that you see, like on the third slide, when you see it's in black and white, that's what it looked like back then in the 1800s or something like that. Those that you see all colorful, that's the way that St. Croix looks currently. Okay? Nothing has changed. All they try to do is maintain those buildings so the place looks historical. Unless you build a new house or something like that, everything basically, especially in the towns, Christiansted or Frederiksted town area, they look basically identical. Because if you look at the black and white picture with the people in the street, that's back then in slavery, and then you see the yellow one, that's how it looks now. You can't tell the difference, besides it looks nice and colorful now. Okay? The rules and regulations regarding slavery in the Danish West Indies show that whipping and amputation of limbs were punishments that slaves in the West Indies risked facing if they attempted escape or revolt. So you know they were taking their lives in their hand when they were deciding that they're going to fight for their freedom. Okay? The revolt was not completely bloodless, with several people wounded or murdered when soldiers fired on formerly enslaved people rioting in Christiansted, and 8 formerly enslaved people imprisoned, tried, and executed for crimes of property destruction to arson. This was a great success for the formerly enslaved people on St. Croix and for Black world as a whole. Yet while legally all were free, social and institutional change had yet to take place. After emancipation, many formerly enslaved people went back to working the cane fields and plantations, as sugar was the sole staple of the economy. In 1849, new labor laws also restricted formerly enslaved people movement between professions, stating that they could only change jobs once during the year on contract day. These oppressive labor practices were not changed until the people revolted again in the 1878 fire burn. And we call that Queen Mary Bun because they revolted so where they basically burned the island down from one end to the other. Okay, but we know how it turns out in the end. You get captured, they kill a few of you, and all of that crap. Anywho, Denmark was the first state to prohibit slave trade, officially putting an end to it in 1792. However, the slaves in the West Indies, aka Caribbean, weren't liberated until 1848, 15 years later than the British slaves. Since the abolition of the slave trade, Denmark attempted to sell the West Indies. Now, mind you, slave trade is over. So because they can't use the slaves, I guess, the way they were using them before, they no longer wanted them, so they wanted to pawn them off on somebody. Okay, so succeeding finally in 1917, Denmark sold us to the United States for $25 million worth of gold for reasons of military strategy. Okay, the West Indies became unincorporated territory under the United States, thus ending the Caribbean colonialist adventure with Denmark. But for the islanders, the history of colonialism continued. According to many of the locals, some of the biggest problems in society, poverty and crime, are closely connected to colonialism. So you know, even though Denmark sold the US Virgin Islands to United States of America, nothing really changed because America just continued on wherever Denmark left off. The US Virgin Islands argument can be likened to telling the descendants of the victims of the Nazi regime that their history didn't matter. However, according to Anderson, Denmark may still offer an apology, perhaps not now, but it is a political decision, so it may change. If the United States of America one day offers Denmark the possibility of apologizing and possibly paying some form of compensation, then it may happen. Now, I went through all of that just to show you the connection between us in the U.S. Virgin Islands, in the Caribbean, whichever other islands that the United States of America has its hand on, how related it is to your situation right here in the United States of America. If Black America doesn't get reparation, every Caribbean island dependent on America's positive response to reparation will get nothing. Vice versa. If they give us, they're going to have to give you. If they give you, they're going to have to give us. So right now, they're playing cat and mouse. They apologized to us in 2009, but they haven't given us anything. And they're keeping the Denmark from apologizing and giving us anything. Okay? So our connection goes so damn deep. This is the reason why when you're going to say something, think about what you're going to say. It's better to be quiet. So when you open up your mouth, you sound smart. Okay? For this reason, chattel slavery reparation project is applicable to every country involved and benefited from chattel slavery. It is also why we must make selections that keep on giving. In fact, we must consolidate our efforts when approaching this situation and the governing bodies of these countries. We are not just doing this for us. We are doing this for all so-called Blacks who came before us, regardless of who held their suffrage papers. Denmark may have held our suffrage papers, but what Denmark did was pass it on to the United States of America. So now the United States of America is holding the Black Americans hostage from repair, the same way it's holding the United States Virgin Islands hostage from repair. And God knows how many other Caribbean islands the United States of America is holding hostage from repair for chattel slavery. Anywho, in turn, if we do it this way, in turn, this will pave the way for all so-called Blacks who will come after us. And I know you want your grandchildren, your great-grand, and your great-great-grand to be in a way better position than we are today. To atone for the atrocities against Blacks as a people, we must stipulate the following repair. Stocks. We must be sure to stipulate that we receive majority stocks in all of the companies or corporations in every country tied to chattel slavery. And even with a name change, we retain possession of our majority stock holdings, and that no change of any sort reduces our majority stock holding or ownership. Why? Because these corporations are worth trillions of dollars off the backs of chattel slavery of Blacks, while Black wealth is on track to be zero wealth, $00 in wealth by 2082. So you tell me if that's where you would like to be, or your grandchildren, or your great-great-great-great-grandchildren. Like I said, we need to make selection that just keeps on giving. Free land. We must stipulate that we receive free land in the form of a few fully developed states in the United States of America, on islands in every body of water, and every country involved in the chattel slave trade. Why? We weren't allowed to earn an income or own anything. Most importantly, we weren't allowed to own land. Wealth is generational. If left over generations, it compounds and grows. This has contemporary effects. We don't need tolerance. We need our own space. You see everybody for us getting murdered and all of this by the KKK police force and all these different things that are happening to us. We go to court because you murder our family and you give us $1 and say that should be beneficial to us. You know, we have to stop this. We really have to stop this. The constitution of every country involved in chattel slavery. We must stipulate that blacks construct a constitution for blacks. Why? The founding fathers and framers of the constitution of all of these countries were all white. Whether they be men or women, they were white. I don't want to say men, even though I knew men was running the world, because we really don't know if it had some ish sitting up in there helping them along. Because so far, everything these ish has done is to crush us. Okay? This is why the United States Constitution of America, for example, was never used in support of blacks. It was used to help corporations, though. Make the corporations a person. I have never seen a building walk and need sustenance. They need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to shit. I have never seen that. But the Constitution that was supposed to be working for us, those amendments, it went and it helped those buildings become people. And they had us listed as less than human beings. Okay? Anywho, think about in February 2019. A lot of people don't put too much thought to this, but you have to think about this when you think of how the Constitution in these places were created and framed by white people. February 2019, New York City had to issue guidelines for discrimination against black people's hair, natural hair that grows out of our scalp that the Most High gave us. We don't even have right to design it or decorate it or comb it the way we want. So nothing has changed. The Constitution was not built for us. I use this example to say we will never find freedom or peace under laws that were constructed to eliminate us. Let's talk about tax. We must be sure to stipulate that tax shall not be leveled against us. Okay? Why? We pay taxes even when we were not represented or even considered a whole human being. Even the buildings, the corporations were considered human beings. They're a person. We weren't. We were not considered people, but we were considered enough to pay taxes. In fact, to this day, we are still fighting to be counted, because every time you have to vote, you have to fight. They do all kind of tricks and whatever to get you, to keep you from the polls. So you're still fighting up to today. Nothing has changed. Taxes are supposed to upkeep your community. When you pay taxes, you expect that the roads are going to look nice, your neighborhood will look nice, you have nice, decent stores. Hell, that's not the case. Black neighborhoods don't benefit from the taxes. The roads are holy. You have stores that if you could go in there and get a half carton of milk that ain't spoiled, you're lucky. No decent, healthy food. But you go in the white neighborhoods and you see how nice it looks. The roads are nice, the stores are decent. You know what they do in the black neighborhoods? They throw all the liquor stores and stuff, anything that to keep us in a deprivated way. Okay? Free education. Let's talk about free education. We must stipulate that past and present educational loans be voided. And if blacks want or must attend the white educational facilities, the full education is free. Why? We were prevented from reading and writing with the threat of bodily harm or death. And in a lot of cases, it was death. Your eyes get gouged out, they amputate you and stuff like that. And when their hands were forced, they weaponized education against us to put us in debt and teach us lies about our history. Okay? They kept us from reading because they hid everything in the books. So when they realized they didn't have a choice but to put us in schools, what they did was pretend like they were doing us a favor by building a university and then tell you how to pay this kind of money to be there. So you be in debt. As long as you are in debt, they have control over you. You go in the schools, yeah, they want to learn, put them in our schools. They learn based on what we want them to learn. That's how the immunization fit in. Don't they tell you in order for you to come to the school, you have to be immunized? And what immunization doing to us? What it doing to the black boys? You know what I mean? Knowledge is power. And that's the reason why we were denied that power to create our own wealth. Today, the median household net worth for black college grads is about 32,780, and that was back in the day, okay? While for a white non-college grad, it's about 80,692. So I went to college, I got all this education, and I'm seeing it where I work right now. I'm seeing it, okay? I see white people get positions that I know for sure they ain't qualified for, okay? But they get it because, you know, just like I know. Let's talk about monetary compensation, okay? And the reason why I put this as number 6, because it's a given, but I don't feel it should be what the conversation should open up with, because when you start talking money, they are going to feel that they already filled whatever gap of responsibility, and they're not going to be listening to you after that. They feel they wrote you a check, and that's it. You're supposed to be gone out of their face. You have to remember, even if you buy black, the black people supplying their self with the stock that you come in to buy from white people. So the money is going to get back to them regardless of what. Okay? Now, if we talk about all the stuff that I just talked about before I talk about monetary compensation, that monetary compensation is a good start for you. It gives you the opportunity to be able to move around and function. You're not going to have the worries of, I have to pay tax. I have to worry about the education. I have to worry about all these extra things. It will give you a good start. You have land, you get to build a house. You know what I mean? It gives you a starting point, something you don't have right now. We must stipulate that we receive monetary compensation for our ancestors' person and free labor. Why? Chattel slaves were forced to work in the worst conditions, and sometimes they will work to death. This is a fact. A lot of people in the Caribbean, and they'll tell you because it's recorded, they live a shorter life than American slaves. Okay? Why? Because they worked at a different type of level. They used to threaten American slaves that they would send them in the Caribbean if they didn't act right, because they knew the level of work that they were putting in on these people. You know what I mean? The constitution of chattel slave countries institutionalized slaves of blacks. In doing this, everyone garnered wealth in the trillions off the backs of blacks, except blacks. Such amounts should be evaluated based on what the slaves and slave labor would be worth in today's currency. I find it very difficult to think that we are going to accept a check for hundreds of years of murder, hardship, broken families, just to name a few. So like I said, when we think about sitting down and talking about this, we cannot have any and everybody speaking on our behalf, okay? And whatever you Black Americans do, it will affect us in the Virgin Islands, the United States Virgin Island, in the Caribbean, and any other Caribbean island that the United States of America has dibs on, okay? So when you sit down to talk, don't just talk monetary compensation. You start out with stocks in those corporations and you work your way down. And you don't get up from that table till they decide that you are going to get these 6 things. Because the way I see it, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I know a lot of you can. So we're not sitting waiting for them to do right by us. We are going to continue to build and do what we do. But we still expect somebody to be held accountable for what happened. And chattel slavery was institutionalized to keep blacks in a servitude position. And to this day, even though you don't see us in the cane field or picking cotton or growing rice or whatever else was going on, they still have us in that servitude position. Whether you have your own business, you live in your $1 million house, or you drive in your $1 million car, it doesn't matter. You still in the servitude position as long as your skin is black or so-called black. You're still in a servitude position. So you better duke up, because that's the only how we're going to get out of this. If you don't have a hobby, find a craft that you like. There are a host of crafts available to you. Find out who needs what you produce with your craft. There's always a need. Sometimes people don't know what they need until you bring it to them. Become an expert in your craft by learning everything about it. The more you know about your craft, the better you can exploit it.